So we're talking about MIDI arranging and sequencing. And I want to kind of just detail a little bit about how they're different and how they work together. So arranging oftentimes is the process of working the vertical stack, all of the voices and the sounds that are actually making up the overall sound in any given time. While the sequence is essentially the horizontal, like what's the progression that's being used, how many times does it repeat, how are the transitions working, and in this particular session, there's a combination of things going on. There's tempo mapping, there's tempo changing, and there's really only two sections, and they kind of seek to grow over time. You can see the growth taking place as instruments try to stack vertically. And they really are trying to tell a very short story. So this was a composition that I made to go along with a film trailer, and so it's a very short piece, and it's ideally designed in a way where it comes and goes rather quickly, and it uses short bursts of phrasing. So let's take a look real quick. And what I want to do is start by showing you kind of how I started the sequence, and then I went from the sequence to arranging that vertical element and bringing in the right types of sounds. So I'm going to start with this string here. So this section was actually originally written on the piano, in just real clear open sets. There's not real the notation at this point isn't very quick. This is the chill, like kind of growing section of this, the wind up to what's happening on screen. And so when I start looking at stacking the arrangement, what I oftentimes start to do is try to identify which voices are going to be the strongest, which ones need to be identified and clear. And really go through that process of like making sure that the voicings really match what's happening with the bigger picture and broaden it. So, I set up a couple of different instrumentation elements. Viola 2 and cello 2 are the first, or cello are the first ones to enter. And now these are the arco paths, and what you're about to see is what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these and I'm going to duplicate them and make the sustain paths. So oftentimes when I'm arranging, it's a lot easier to make different path sets for them just so that I can manipulate the sound. So let's take a listen when we add these in. And you can kind of hear, so these aren't really the right sounds. They're not the best sustained elements. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take my string section here, particularly the ones that have MIDI at this spot, and I'm going to duplicate them. And then what I'm going to do with them is I'll leave in their plugins, their automation. I'm going to go in and make them kind of like the sustain section of what's happening here, and kind of really fill that out. But again, what's happening is the sequence is already built horizontally from end to end. What we now need to do is build the storytelling vertically with the arrangement. And so let's take a look. I'm going to jump to the mix window and just kind of look at some of these voices to fill them out as we start. So I'm sorry. So let's start with Viola 2. Right now it's a little too small ensemble feel. It needs a lot more sustain, which means it's going to need a little bit of a bigger space. So what I'm going to do with this is a lot of these are being used native instruments patches that are in, and I'm actually going to replace this one and go with the ensemble here, the viola ensemble. Let's take a listen. Maybe add a little bit more reverb. Great. All right. So that's that one by itself. Let's go ahead and take a look at that cello section as well. I'm going to go to the cello next door. And the goal here, of course, is we're trying to fill this out vertically, right? So I'm going to eliminate that one. Let's take this one also to sustain, maybe add a little bit more reverb. But let's listen to the cello by itself real quickly. And add in that viola. Okay, cool. We're telling the story. Now, notice as we move along, what you're going to see is you see stacking taking place. So like we're adding in parts as we go. So we'll go take a look at that. The next one in is violin 2. So let's go to violin 2. Violin 2 is up next. Let's get the instrument filled out. Since I already kind of know what I want, sustain for violin 2, maybe a little more reverb. Let's take a listen. Here it comes right here. And then right here at the very end. And so kind of we're going to talk a little bit more about this as we go, but the what's happening is we start to fill in some of these pieces is we're adding not just different instruments, but also different ranges of those instruments. So as we add the violin, we're adding both, in some instances, 2 octaves at a time. I think, oh yeah, viola 1. And sometimes what's happening is even having to make a distinction between what is the viola 1, viola 2 versus the violin 1, violin 2 part doing? Like how are they, what is the reason for a 1 and a 2? Sometimes the octave sections are happening, between them. But sometimes there's actually new notes that are being introduced, throughout a passage. And we're going to see that a little later down the line. Not exactly here, but let's take a listen to that last phrase stack right at the end with everybody in. Oh, sorry, I lost my bass. One more. All right. And so a lot of times what's like super helpful in terms of stacking these is just kind of like looking at what are the variations of like switching and transposing, moving certain octaves, adjusting certain pieces and then putting them in different areas. And that's part of the arranging. So it's like truly the sequence itself. When we talk about sequencing, the sequence could really be, especially in something like this, in a composition, could all be established on piano. In this instance, it was established on the stir string. But if I went back and I said, all right, well, let's, if I was writing this on piano, let me blot that out for just a second, and switch it over real quick. Let's take a listen at the sequencing can all be done pretty easily on something like this. And then I'm just going to switch it over here. Sorry, it's still loading. Now, what's about to happen in section 2 really starts to set this apart. What actually happens on the piano? There's the rest of what's seen on the piano is a bit of a merge, utilizing MIDI merge and kind of stacking a lot of ideas in together. We're able to get a lot out of it, but you're going to see essentially there's a lot of skipping around, a lot of movement, a lot of arpeggiation, and again, that's the sequence. We get a tempo change right here, and this is what the phrasing tends to feel like. Not super exciting on piano, but let's go to look at the voicing stack in the actual arrangement. Oh, we're gonna go see the strings are now gonna switch over to this arco section. So these are really all the sustains. And now we switch over to the arco section. These guys are going to be out. And just to make it easy, I'm just going to eliminate the MIDI. As long as I see that grouping. Let's go and get rid of that MIDI so we don't have that issue. And now we're going to go listen to what happens with the strings as soon as I switch over to this arco path. And they're basically just expounded upon from the piano, that initial sequence. They're just stacked in a certain way and all given different options for movement. Here they go. So that arrangement section is really focused on that vertical stack, like getting everybody stacked up in a way where there's almost this ensemble feel. And then it really starts to get fun because in this section I added this kind of like these counterparts or counter melodies with the brass, and I give everybody kind of an identity, so shape up this horn sound coming in. You'll start to hear it kind of call through, and then we add in some trombone, some trumpet, and then we stack it all together with some percussion, and we're really all set with our composition. So let's take a look. And to fill that out, I just did a horn 2 and 3, and I start stacking in different notes, note ranges, and octaves to make that fill between these 3 horns. So let's listen to that horn section. Start to kind of feel a little bit more regal. Let's add some trombone. And you notice there's actually an echoing in that horn too of the original melody. You'll hear it throughout in the brass to kind of mimic what the strings were doing earlier. Trombones come in to kind of push this melody or this rhythm. The trumpets are going to come up top to fill that out. And as we start mixing, we can really give everybody kind of like a location in this ensemble. So instead of having everybody just panned wide left, right, we can actually start to bring in some positioning. So if we kind of start, working the horns, let's go, let's say the horns are just in this like kind of upper left quadrant. Let's go push them there real quick. And then we'll bring in those strings nice and slow. Add a little percussion. I got a couple of timpanis rolling here. Actually, I'm not using that one. And a little bit of this. I just mixed a bass drum with the snare on the same rhythm here to really stack that out. And so, again, like some of these rhythms are literally just borrowed from one another. So I might actually be stealing some rhythms from one part here to another part here and stacking it on a new instrument. All of a sudden, we have this vertical depth, and that's what really gets us to that widening in the arrangement. Now I need some balancing, but you notice there's a lot of aligning. There's a lot of alignment taking place. Like, and so one of the things I always preach is just look at what's going on vertically, like even on the timeline, like who's doing what, who's coming in. You can see, especially for horns, French horns are so slow when they make their attacks, and so all of them have to be slid off the grid just a little forward to land in time. Everybody else is usually pretty good, but definitely some slow sustained strings have that same issue. But that's it. Arranging versus sequencing and how they really work together. It's really exciting stuff. Like once you really start getting into it, it's you realize that a lot of the functions that you're using half the time are copy paste and transposing. You're shifting things around, and once you kind of get a frame or a template of sounds that you like to use, you can save that template. So that's kind of your starting point as you're dropping in MIDI and sounds in order to be able to make an entire song or a composition that feels right.